floated the idea of a subpoena to compel the president to testify. A story of truth or consequences ahead, plus the president's latest threat to use his power to get involved with the Justice Department. News is breaking now. Let's get to it.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
Every day brings a flood of news from Washington, but rarely have we had so much to report on so many different fronts from the White House. Today, first, President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, giving details of what he believes a face-to-face meeting between the president and the special counsel Robert Mueller would look like and sound like. The former New York City mayor told the Washington Post's Robert Costa this afternoon, and John Roberts has just confirmed, that he would want the interview to be a maximum of 2 to 3 hours and around a narrow set of questions, not as broad as the 49-question list that somebody floated 2 nights ago. He made those comments just after Fox News confirmed the New York Times report that the White House lawyer Ty Cobb is leaving. He will no longer deal with the Russia investigation. Officially, he's retiring at the end of the month. There's more reporting to be done on this. And in his place, Emmett Flood, an attorney who represented President Bill Clinton during his impeachment trial. Emmett Flood, from a white shoe firm with experience in congressional investigations from the Bush 43 presidency. If his hiring is finalized, Emmett Flood is expected to take a less cooperative approach with the special counsel. In another big development today, President Trump is threatening to use his powers as commander-in-chief to, quote, get involved in the Justice Department. It's the second time in less than a week that President Trump has said he may step in on Justice Department business. But the president has not been specific about what exactly he might do. On Twitter this morning, President Trump blasted what he called the Justice Department's rigged system and the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. He tweeted, "There was no collusion, it is a hoax, and there is no obstruction of justice. That is a setup and trap. What there is negotiations going on with North Korea over nuclear war, negotiations going on with China over trade deficits, negotiations on NAFTA, and much more. Witch hunt." This comes after President Trump's former lead attorney John Dowd confirmed to Fox News that the special counsel Robert Mueller raised the idea of a subpoena for the president to testify in front of a grand jury. The Washington Post broke that story last night. Dowd now tells Fox News that Mueller mentioned the subpoena during a meeting last month while attorneys were discussing terms of a possible interview. A week after that, the special counsel apparently gave President Trump's lawyers a list of dozens of questions for President Trump. Mueller, of course, is looking into Moscow's meddling in the 2016 presidential election, possible collusion with members of President Trump's team, and whether the president obstructed justice. President Trump has repeatedly said there was no collusion and no obstruction. Headline recap. One lawyer out, another lawyer in. Guidelines for an interview with the president, a special counsel threat to subpoena the president, plus a presidential threat to alter the investigation. And it's only 3:04. Our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, is live on the North Lawn. Just got off the phone, I hear.
I did, yeah. I just got off the phone with Rudy Giuliani, who has now taken over the position as the president's lead liaison with the Office of the Special Counsel. In fact, I had to hang up with him, Shep, so I could come out here and visit with you. Giuliani's certainly not certain about whether the president will sit down for an interview with Mueller, telling me, I'm reading from my notes here, my position isn't determined yet. I keep an open mind. We had a good interchange with the special counsel. I respect them. I'm concerned, though, are they objective about the president? Do they have an open mind that he could be telling the truth and Comey lying? If they have an open mind, an interview is something that we would consider. If not, we'd be foolish to have the interview. I asked him about those 49 or 52 questions were in the list that I received. What his opinion of them? He said it's very encouraging that they have no case, very discouraging that they appear to want to trap him into perjury. I asked him what length of interview he would be willing to have the president sit down for. He said somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 hours. He said certainly we're not going to sit down for 12 hours, and that he would want the scope of the questions pared down to just their very basics, saying that he would want the questions in advance, saying that they would have to be about relevant relevant topics, meaning Russia, which may not be relevant any longer, the ex-mayor says. Obstruction of justice has to do with the Comey firing, so they could ask about that. The rest is tangential, and we would want a commitment that they'll decide to do this before the end of the summer so it doesn't drag on. And quoting the mayor here saying, further imperil the future of the nation. I asked when something like this might happen. The mayor told me that because the president is actively involved in negotiations with North Korea for a summit there, likely wouldn't happen probably until the beginning part of the summer, but certainly negotiations do continue. Now to some of the other news in terms of the turnover here at the White House. Ty Cobb, who was the president's in-house counsel, attached to the White House counsel's office on the Mueller investigation, being replaced by Emmett Flood. Let's put up a statement from Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying, for several weeks, Ty Cobb has been discussing his retirement. Last week, he let Chief of Staff Kelly know that he would retire at the end of the month. Emmett Flood is a partner at Williams & Connolly. He clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. He was one of President Clinton's impeachment lawyers. He represented Dick Cheney, the former vice president, in the Valerie Plame civil suit, advised former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, and was also a member of the White House counsel's office working here in the Bush administration. Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying Emmett Flood will be joining the White House staff to represent the president and the administration against the Russia witch hunt. I asked Rudy Giuliani about it. He didn't really have too much to say about Flood, but apparently he told the Washington Post that the president wanted somebody in that was more aggressive than Ty Cobb. So Ty will be staying until the end of May, as we understand it, and then Flood comes in. There's also some talk that he might be an eventual replacement for the White House counsel, Don McGahn. Shep?
And since we're talking about lawyers, former attorney John Dowd, you had a conversation with him as well.
I did, and he confirmed what happened over the course of a couple of meetings in early March, where they were negotiating with the special counsel Robert Mueller and his deputy James Quarles over a potential interview of the president by the special counsel, in which Mueller said, well, you know, if you don't agree to a voluntary interview, we can always issue a subpoena and haul him before a grand jury. To which John Dowd said, quote, this isn't some game. You are screwing with the work of the President of the United States. A week later, Mueller's deputy, James Quarles, had a conversation with the president's legal team, gave them a list of 49, or as I said, our list was 52 questions that Mueller would like to ask the president. Alan Dershowitz this afternoon saying, in no way, shape, or form, based on those questions, should the president sit down, but they do have another option. Listen here.
I would submit answers in writing to almost all of them, and then make objections to the others based on Article 2 of the Constitution, and then tell the American public, look, I've answered all these questions. Why are they trying to bring me into a grand jury? This interferes with my right to govern, and I think he would be in a better position politically and perhaps even legally if he were to provide answers to the questions.
So I asked Rudy Giuliani specifically this afternoon, those 49 or 52 questions, do you believe those represent or look like a perjury trap? He said, quote, we all do. The questions almost cry out. They don't have a case. They're desperate. They want to make a case. Look at how few questions, if any, about Russia. They've lost that one. Now they're falling back to obstruction. So that really has got the hinky up on the president's legal team, Shep. So, again, they may agree to sit down. They may think that this is the best way to do it, as opposed to getting a subpoena from Robert Mueller. But that horse is still a long way from getting out of the barn.
A new and aggressive public face on all of this, though, and word from the president tweeting, John, that he might use his presidential powers to get involved with this. What does that mean?
Well, I don't know if it would be to get involved with this, though he did say in recent days that he thinks that the Justice Department is going after the wrong people and letting the right people skate, and that if that continues to happen, he may get involved. This latest tweet appears to be in reference to the document demands from members of Congress. The president tweeting this morning, quote, a rigged system. They don't want to turn over documents to Congress. What are they afraid of? Why so much redacting? Why such unequal justice? At some point, I will have no choice but to use the powers granted to the presidency and get involved. Broadly, this is a fight between Congress and the Department of Justice over documents related to the various investigations that are going on. Members of Congress not happy with the fact that there's a lot of redactions. In particular, there is this one memo, which is the so-called scope memo that Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, wrote to Robert Mueller, which details what he can and cannot investigate. You'll notice that there are huge redactions in this memo. Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan, Republicans, want to get the unredacted memos so they can see exactly what it is that Mueller is up to. But look at this. Here's one page, Shep. It's almost completely redacted, and then redactions on the third page as well. We'll see if they're successful, Shep.
All right, John. John Roberts, busy day at the White House again. Thank you. Caroline Polisi's here, federal and white-collar criminal defense attorney. The Republican group wants to do something for sure. They say they want some documents, but they want to get in the way of this. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. That's what they want to do, isn't it?
They do want to get in the way of it. I think the interesting thing about that tweet is nobody really knows what President Trump means. And I think some have floated the idea that he's talking about potentially firing Rod Rosenstein, which he's been talking about doing for a while now. Obviously, he's overseeing the entirety of the Mueller investigation, because I think Trump is pointing out that he feels that he's kind of throwing his hands up at everything here at this point. He's kind of just sick of the whole thing.
Well, they've put on a very aggressive public face of this. Beginning today, Rudy Giuliani, the first Trump lawyer to speak with any specificity about and it sounds almost like Rudy Giuliani's in charge now. Like maybe he's going to set the rules of the special counsel. No, you'll go 2 hours. No, you won't ask those questions. No, we'll do it this. Yeah. They can subpoena him.
I was going to say, Shep, that's really not how it works.
That's not how this works.
Giuliani rolled in here. Remember the initial statement was he was going to wrap this thing up in a couple of weeks. That's obviously changed. And now all of a sudden the story is he's going to decide on the legal strategy within the next couple of weeks. But the fact is, look, it behooves both sides not to take this all the way up to the Supreme Court in terms of getting a subpoena.
Think about how that trick's going to go.
Exactly.
First thing you do is yes, and then where are you?
Right. So both sides have a little bit of bargaining power. Like when you say there, of course, the ultimate trump card, if you will, on Mueller's side is the subpoena.
I see what you did there.
I know, you see what I did. But they still have some bargaining power. So Giuliani does have the look. Alan Dershowitz has been saying.
Oh, he's looking for a job.
Well, he's been saying that maybe they would do written interrogatories, questions. You would do something like akin to civil litigation.
Since when?
Absolutely not.
Since when does the one?
Right. I mean, it's not going to happen.
This is not how the rule of law is such that no one is supposed to be above it.
That's right.
And the Supreme Court has always sided with no one's above the law.
So that's right. And I see you're getting to the point of this question of whether or not, they could potentially subpoena the president. And if he chose not to comply, whether or not a court would step in and say you have to. And there isn't exactly a case on point. Of course, Nixon, was about turning over of the tapes, not about testimony. Ken Starr, of course, we all know he subpoenaed Bill Clinton, but he withdrew that subpoena because Clinton voluntarily decided to testify.
Well, after he was subpoenaed.
Yes, but they decided, but it was withdrawn. It wasn't ever finally tested. But you're right that the tenor of the Supreme Court decisions out there speak to this fact that no, a sitting president is not above the law, that if there's an ongoing criminal investigation in which his testimony is needed, that it's likely that a court would choose to move forward with the subpoena. The real question is whether or not he's going to take the fifth. You can debate that for a long time.
That'd be quite a political thing. Yes. Constitutional crisis, anyone?
Yes, absolutely.
Caroline Polisi, thank you. So that's the legal side. The politics next. What if President Trump does refuse to sit down with the special counsel? What if the president does get involved with the Justice Department? These aren't our what ifs. They're the ones who brought it up. We'll discuss those possibilities and what they might mean. That's coming up from the Fox News deck on a quite busy Wednesday afternoon. Glad to have you in. More ahead on a very jam-packed day of headlines in the Russia investigation. Rudy Giuliani, one of the president's lawyers, telling our John Roberts and others that no decision yet on President Trump meeting with the special counsel, but saying an interview would, if it happens, be 2 or 3 hours maximum with a narrow set of questions. Also, the top White House lawyer on the Russia investigation is leaving. A former Bill Clinton impeachment attorney is joining the team. And Fox News has confirmed the special counsel floated the idea of a subpoena to get the president to testify. And President Trump again said he might get involved, as he put it, in the Justice Department. Let's talk about the politics of all this. Jeff Mason is the White House correspondent from Reuters. Man, there have been a lot of busy days around there, but this one's up on the ladder.
Never a dull over here, Shep. Never a dull.
What is the thinking on the politics of a sit-down and how they've changed the public face of this today? There's clearly a new political strategy. Whether there is legal or not, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and politics is obviously playing a big role here. The questions, of course, include whether or not to do that sit down and what to say. And one of the things I heard you talking about earlier was whether or not the president would consider using the Fifth Amendment not to answer questions. You know, imagine the political blowback to that if that was the decision that he made. I can just hear blowback from Democrats, and I can also hear what the president would have said if Hillary Clinton had done the same thing when she was interviewed by the FBI in 2016. That said, the legal advice that he gets from his lawyers, of course, will be the most important thing, and he's got Rudy Giuliani now and another new person coming in to give him that advice.
There appears to be a concerted effort to put people, tell me if you disagree with this, because this is just an observation, to put a bunch of people on television having seen those questions and to say into the television, like this channel, don't do it, Mr. President. Don't do it. Don't go up there. Don't do it. We know you want to. Don't do it. Can't do it.
Well, it's an interesting point, and we all know that the president does watch some television, and he's got a lot of surrogates, as we call them, or friends out there who speak for him and speak on behalf of.
And they all say, don't do it.
His advisors, exactly, and if they start saying that, you never know if that will have an impact.
But then you wonder what the politics might be, and who knows if this would happen. It's certainly possible. How politically it might play if he were then given a subpoena and then had to go in and make a decision, and then Mueller would have to decide whether to immunize him. There's a lot of politics in the middle of that, and you wonder how many people would still be with the president arm in arm in that sort of a circumstance.
Sure, and you have to assume that those are the types of calculations that President Trump and his advisors are taking into account as well. I mean, we know the president's position on this entire investigation. He's made that crystal clear that he thinks this is a witch hunt, and he will no doubt continue to say that, but that doesn't take away the fact that he has to make a decision as to whether or not to sit down with the special counsel one way or the other. And
the truth is that no one can know all that Mueller knows, because despite protestations to the contrary here and there, there's no leaking that I know about from the Mueller investigation, and whatever he has, we may know some of it. There's no way for us to know all of it.
Well, and it's also clear that the special counsel and his staff feel pretty confident. I mean, if they're dropping the possibility of a subpoena in meetings with the president's lawyers, that's certainly a show of confidence on their part. Yeah, Rod Rosenstein seemed to put off an air of confidence, great confidence last night. Hey, it's nice to talk to you. Thanks. You too, chap. An Air National Guard cargo plane. Have you seen this? A cargo plane, a C-130, has crashed in the Savannah area and sent a column of smoke into the clouds. What we know about the crash and about those on board just ahead. And another Southwest Airlines jet makes an emergency landing, and it again has a broken window. That's next. The breaking news now, the military transport plane that has crashed just after takeoff in Georgia, killing at least 5 people. That's according to a National Guard spokesman to Fox News. This happened during a training mission near the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport. Our surveillance camera caught the crash, and look at the center of the screen here. You can see the C-130 right at the top, and then as it heads down toward the trees. We've frozen the video to avoid showing that moment of impact. A driver recorded the aftermath of the crash.
All right, so the C-130 literally just dropped out of the sky and blew up on the street. Holy holy. All right.
You can see the thick smoke billowing into the air. And in this next shot, you can see the tail of the plane just off the side of the highway. Jonathan Seri works our Southeast newsroom from Atlanta. Jonathan, investigators started speaking just minutes ago. What have we learned?
Yeah, they did indeed. The military saying that an investigation into this crash is underway. Here's what they said just moments ago.
To be honest, that's not my area of expertise, and I wouldn't want to answer that and give out any information that wouldn't be accurate. So I can just say that there will be a safety board that will be convened of experts that are, skilled at looking at these type of crashes.
Now, you heard the witnesses referring to a C-130. That's the C-130 Hercules, an aircraft used for transporting troops and supplies. It has been a workhorse of the military for more than 60 years, has a good safety record. It had just left Savannah with 5 crew members on board and was bound for Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. It crashed shortly after taking off from Savannah, the fiery wreckage covering a portion of Highway 21, a busy thoroughfare just outside the airport property.
As far as we know, there were no cars hit in this crash. It is an absolute miracle at that time of day and that intersection.
And the Air National Guard is in the process of notifying next of kin. Shep.
Man, Jonathan Seri in Atlanta. Jonathan, thank you. A Southwest Airlines flight forced to land this morning because of a cracked window. A spokesperson for Southwest says nobody was hurt and the cabin never lost pressure. Here's a photo, though. A passenger says he took this photo of the broken window. Other people who were on board describe hearing popping noises coming from that area during the flight. The plane was flying from Chicago to New Jersey, but diverted to Cleveland. This comes just a couple of weeks after the engine on a different Southwest Airlines plane exploded and blew out a window mid-flight, killing a woman who had been partially sucked out of the jet. Trace Gallagher with the rest of this story. Trace?
Shep, the Southwest 737 was flying over Lake Erie at 26,000 feet, traveling about 520 miles per hour when the window cracked. And as you mentioned, the passengers say they could hear it cracking, which apparently freaked a few people out. And really, can you blame them? Those on board say the pilots and flight attendants calmed everyone down, explained what happened, and told them they would land as quickly as possible. Southwest issued a statement that reads in part, quoting, "The aircraft has been taken out of service for maintenance review, and our Cleveland employees are working diligently to accommodate the 76 customers on a new aircraft to Newark." And the turnaround was pretty quick, because later one of the passengers tweeted, quoting, "On our way to New Jersey in a new plane, thanks to the Southwest air crew and pilots for handling it professionally." And just so you know, the windows on these jets have 3 window panes. They're all made of acrylic, and the system is built to be fail-safe. In other words, if the outside pane breaks, the middle pane is built to handle the same pressure, so is the inside pane, which it gives you an idea of just how much velocity the shrapnel had from the Southwest engine that broke apart a couple of weeks ago to bust through all those window panes and take the life of 43-year-old Jennifer Reardon. We should note that in the wake of the April 17th engine explosion, the FAA mandated that all similar engines with 30,000 cycles, that's takeoff and landings, must be inspected using ultrasound to see if the fan blades have metal fatigue. And then yesterday, the FAA changed the ultrasound inspection mandate to engines with 20,000 cycles, though it still remains unclear why the scrutiny was stepped up a bit. Shep.
Very interesting. Trace Gallagher, thank you. After a legal showdown that lasted more than a decade, a judge has now ordered Iran to pay billions of dollars to families of the victims of the attacks of 9/11. Of course, nobody expects Tehran to cough up any money, but there is a way that the families could get some money. That and how the Saudis could be next. That's coming up after bottom of the hour headlines. A Fox report now and bottom of the hour headlines from Fox News. Police in California say they're looking for a sex offender who led them on a 100-mile chase in a motorhome with his 2 young kids inside. LA County Sheriff's officials say detectives tried to arrest him yesterday, but he got away. Cops say after that RV stopped, they found the kids safe inside, but the suspect was gone. Police in Florida have arrested the brother of the Parkland school shooting suspect. They say Zachary Cruz violated his probation by driving without a valid license and getting too close to a school. Officers arrested him in March for trespassing at the school where police say his brother killed 17 people. And more than 1,300 drones lighting up the sky in China. The drone company broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the most unmanned aerial vehicles in the air at the same time. There's a record for everything, isn't there? The news continues. President Trump visiting the State Department for the swearing in of his new Secretary of State. They made a big deal out of this today. Mike Pompeo already on the job. This was ceremony and lots of big players involved here. You can tell President Trump is sending the message, Mike Pompeo is my guy. He's taking over in the middle of a couple of major foreign policy issues. On Iran, the Secretary of State says that the Trump administration is still deciding the next steps for what he calls the flawed nuclear deal. And on North Korea, he says the U.S. has an unprecedented opportunity to deal with that nation's nuclear program. Of course, as CIA Director, Mike Pompeo secretly met with Kim Jong-un over the Easter weekend, they've now reported, to lay the groundwork for President Trump's planned meeting with the North Korean dictator. Rich Edson has an update for us live at the State Department. Man, they were really embracing today.
Yeah, they really were, Shep. And this was a significant show of support from the president to his new Secretary of State. And by the way, this was the president's first trip to the State Department. So it was the president, cabinet officials, senior officials within the administration gathering in one of the more ornate reception rooms here at the otherwise very government State Department headquarters. The president says his new Secretary of State has earned his deepest respect, admiration, and trust. Pompeo returned the sentiment.
And I have full confidence that my team here in Washington and around the world under your leadership can and will execute that mission for the benefit of the American people. You all know this is essential work. That's why you're here. It's why I'm here. I look forward to doing this together.
Officials here say they hope that presidential support translates into a much more relevant State Department, one they say the administration sidelined under the previous Secretary of State. Pompeo has already done an international trip as Secretary of State, going to Belgium and the Middle East yet.
What else did we get from Pompeo today on Iran?
Well, he is pushing for European countries to agree to changes to Iran policy. If not, he says the president's going to withdraw from the deal. The former Deputy National Security Advisor for President Obama tweeted earlier today, quote, "To summarize this week's absurdity, the same people who've always opposed the Iran deal argue it should be scrapped, even though Iran is complying because of something Iran did before the deal, and its inspections regime was put in place to prevent Iran from doing those things." Iran has been saying that it's ready to restart its nuclear program if the U.S. withdraws. Shep.
Rich Edson at the State Department, thank you. A federal judge is ordering Iran to pay billions of dollars to the families of the victims of the attacks of 9/11. The victims' relatives filed the lawsuit in the year 2004, but they weren't able to go forward with it until 2016. That's when the U.S. Congress passed a bill that allows people to sue foreign governments accused of terrorism. The judge's ruling finds that Iran, its Revolutionary Guard, and its central bank are liable for the deaths of more than 1,000 victims. The judge set the damages at more than $12 million per spouse, $8 million per parent or child, $4 million per sibling killed in the terrorist attacks. But analysts say it's mostly a symbolic victory here, since Iran hasn't responded to the lawsuit even, and there's really no way to force the country to pay. Still, the victims' families could receive some money. The reason? Nearly 4 decades ago, the U.S. took control of hundreds of millions of dollars in Iranian money as punishment for the Iranian hostage crisis. The families are now eligible to collect from those funds. But that's only if that money is still left. Some of that money went back to Iran nuclear deal. Now, all of this comes with just over a week left for President Trump to decide whether to pull the United States out of that deal. Let's turn to Michael O'Hanlon now, Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution, which is a nonprofit public policy organization. He specializes in U.S. defense strategy. What would getting out of it mean, practically speaking?
Hi, Shepard. Well, it means, for example, that there are no more inspectors who would go back to look and see what Iran is up to with its centrifuges, assuming that Iran itself then pulled out. But for us, what it would mean is that we would no longer lift the sanctions that have been, imposed a long time ago, but waived because of the deal, which would restrict American businesses doing business with Iran and restrict indirectly other companies that want to do business with American companies from themselves being involved with Iran. So it begins to put back in place the economic restrictions that had been largely what led to the deal in the first place. It would do so only imperfectly, as you know, because other countries would not be obligated by our decision. Their individual companies might choose to do business or not with Iran, facing the possibility of indirect sanctions by American law, but they wouldn't be directly affected. So that's why it's a suboptimal way for us to try to deal with Iranian misbehavior. But that's the concept that's being deliberated now.
You hear about remunerations for 9/11. Where's Saudi Arabia in this thing?
Well, exactly. This particular lawsuit, as you said, as you pointed out in that very concise and helpful report, is in response to a recent law. but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in broader strategic terms because, of course, 15 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia, none of them came from Iran, per se. There may have been some movement through Iran. And if you want to look for things that Iran's done badly or harmfully against Americans, there are some much more vivid examples. Creating Hezbollah, which bombed the Marine barracks in Lebanon in 1983, the Khobar Towers attack in late 1990s in Saudi Arabia, and all the arming of Iraqi insurgents through the period of the most intense fighting in the Iraq War. Those were all cases where a lot more Americans died directly because of Iranian action. So this may presage other kinds of lawsuits, I suppose. But you're right, it's a little bit incongruous with the history to focus on this particular role of Iran in this particular tragedy.
The idea of suing foreign nations in this way was very controversial at the time, right?
Yeah, the problem is, of course, that with Iran, most people acknowledge that Iran uses terrorism as a tool of foreign policy. But in some cases, people get into a debate, well, who's a terrorist, who's a freedom fighter, what's terrorism, what's, an insurgent attack that's sort of normal in the annals of war. In other words, you get into a lot of gray areas, and then who's going to decide when an American action in a theater are portrayed as terrorism and then retaliate against American citizens or their holdings accordingly. So that's the kind of slope you have to worry about slipping down. I think you need some kind of a fairly neutral adjudicating body that's going to figure out when and if something is terrorism. And I'm not sure a regular American court of law suffices for that judgment.
Yeah, Michael O'Hanlon from Brookings. Thanks, Michael. Good to see you.
Thank you, Shepard.
If Democrats win back the House in November, and it's a big if, Nancy Pelosi says she plans to lead them. That's what she told the Boston Globe. Pelosi said, "We will win. I will run for Speaker. I feel confident about it, and my members do too." This would be Pelosi's fourth straight attempt to take back the House since Democrats lost control in 2010. Some members of her own party say the 78-year-old should go. There is division on this matter, but man, can she fundraise. They're calling for new leadership and a new message. Pelosi is not very popular nationally. She's been a consistent target from Republicans, and Republicans often try to use that to their advantage, linking Democratic candidates to her campaign in ads, as you know. Spokesman for the GOP's campaign committee in the House of Representatives tweeted, "Thank you" to Nancy Pelosi. Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is live up in Washington. Man, you talk about piñatas. She's certainly been made into one.
You're right, Shep, and it sounds like Republicans intend to make Nancy Pelosi the focus of this fall's campaign. A RNC spokesman telling Fox, quote, "There is no politician in America who is more disliked than Nancy Pelosi. Any Democrat running in 2018 should be panicking that she wants to be Speaker again."